with that, we're going to jump right on into the first section. So first up, we are going to do a tiered list for the month of June. And this is all the movies that I saw in theaters. So this month I saw 9 things in theaters. I've done individual reviews for all these, so be sure to go check those out in the 2022 movie reviews playlist on my channel for my full thoughts on each of these. This is just going to be a brief recap and just kind of a reflection on the month and potentially changing some of the letter grades. I'm still kind of trying to figure out exactly how to grade things, and kind of my perception of what each tier means changes a little bit from time to time, but I think I've locked it in, and it's something I've been thinking about the last couple days. So I think some of the letter grades from my earlier reviews in the month or even in the last few days may change, just based off of how I think I want to do the tiered system moving forward. So, but with that, we'll start with, and this is just going in order of the ones that I saw. So up first we have Benediction, and this was a film that hadn't heard of before I went to go see it. It was a pretty for me, it was a boring film. I didn't particularly enjoy it. I mean, I say this with like an asterisk on any movie that I see. I appreciate the hard work that goes into making a movie, and all the people involved in that process. So I hate saying that I didn't enjoy a movie, but this one was very meh for me. I do recognize it's based off of a real person, but that, like, in and of itself shouldn't and doesn't really influence my enjoyment of a film. But yeah, this is one that I can't say that I recommend. If but yeah, with that we'll move on to Watcher. This was a horror film, and it was more of like a suspense film. It wasn't really horror. It was like thriller, maybe, if I understand the distinction correctly. But this one almost was in the meh category for me, but I liked where they ended the film. So it was a B tier. So I guess before we maybe get too far into this, to describe my current tiered system. So going from the bottom up, C is very meh. Like, I'm not. It's those are films that I don't recommend seeing. It's not. Some of them, it's not that they're bad films. It's just very meh. So I wouldn't recommend one way or the other sometimes. But for it to be in the B tier, it means that I enjoyed the film and I think it's worth checking out. But that's still, like, there's going to be a lot of movies in the B category. I think that's where most movies start, and then depending on how they go, they can move up or down. It's kind of mentally where I'm at with the movie to begin with. So if I think a movie is fun enough, or if it's worth checking out, maybe a one-time watch, or maybe should have been, I was expecting it to be a much better movie, but it kind of came up short. Things like that I put in the B category. So I think, yeah, like I said, that's kind of the average movie's going to go there. A means that it's a great movie. It's one that I really liked, or potentially loved, and it's clearly above B. Like, I'll enjoy a lot of movies, and there's a lot of movies I enjoy in the B category. A is ones that I really liked, and then S tier is basically cream of the crop, my absolute favorite films, and those don't come along all that often. So that's kind of the tier system. I think I have a clear picture of it, and I like the picture that I have for that. So, like, moving forward, when I'm assigning letter grades for films, that's the template that I'm using. So yeah, B is a recommended, worth the watch. A is something I'm gonna recommend, and highly recommend, and I think S is basically a must see, to kind of correlate those. But with that, we'll move on to the next one, which is Crimes of the Future. This was I'm kind of torn between this one. I think I put it originally in the B tier, and reflecting back, I don't know that it was all that, like, noteworthy of a film. So I'm leaning towards dropping it down to the meh category. But I think it did enough interesting things where it's not a great movie, but it was good. It was worth the watch if you think it's your type of movie. It's directed by Cronenberg, so it's that sort of movie from what I understand, although I don't know much of his stuff. So I put that in the B category. Like, it was done well enough, and I wasn't bored throughout. It's usually a movie that's like that has me bored, that's what gets into the C category. So like I said, B is very average. Um, it's yeah, I think there's something there that's worth checking out, but not necessarily like a high recommendation. Next up, we have Jurassic World Dominion. I believe I originally gave this film a C. I was very meh coming out of it, and on further reflection, I think I was grading it very harshly. I'm like, this isn't as good as the original Jurassic World, but that's like easily an A tier movie. Probably not an S tier, mainly just because I grew up on it, but not enough where it's in that S tier for me. And like I wasn't like I didn't see it in theaters when it released. I think that sort of experience could get the original into an S tier, but at the end of the day, this was a fun film. There is a lot of stuff to nitpick as far as things not really making sense and a lot of holes that I was poking in the story. And so that kind of took me out of the film. But I think that aside, it was a fun film and it's one that I think is worth checking out. I know a lot of people are checking it out. It's a Jurassic movie at the end of the day. But I'm actually going to bump that one up to a B tier. Because it was an enjoyable enough time. While I was finding holes in the script and like poking fun at it, it was still humorous at the same time. And yeah, while it wasn't like the best dinosaur movie I've ever seen, it was still enjoyable. Next up, we have Lightyear. This one I enjoyed quite a bit, mainly I think because I can relate a lot to Buzz and the way they did his character in that film. And so I think like objectively this is probably a B tier movie, but for me and my experience with it, I put it into the A category just because I connected a lot with it. I think it is a fun film. I'm not 100% sure why it seems to be very polarizing, or like people either really like it or they don't, and or like they dislike it and they're unhappy with the direction that the movie went. I think that's what is the kind of that's what's splitting people, where this isn't really the Buzz. It's not a one-to-one with the Buzz that we get in Toy Story. It goes its own way, and the like if you assume that this comes first, which the movie poses that this movie came out and then the Buzz Lightyear toy in the Toy Story movies is based off of this. So like any kind of merchandising, you can get differences in the toys and things like that, or they'll drop things and like lines in the toys that maybe don't line up perfectly with the movie and stuff like that. So maybe that's what people were just looking for, a different movie, and were upset that they got this one. I've been there. I like from the month of May. That is very much, I think, like Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness. Like I had my expectations for that film, and they didn't really go the way that I wanted, so that lessened my experience of it. So everyone is entitled to their own opinion. Obviously, that's the great joy of movies, is we all have different experiences with them, and you know sometimes we like ones better than the others. Next up, we have Brian and Charles. This was a fun film. It seemed like it was just based off of a short story. I think I mentioned in my review, like the first 20 minutes of it was very solid in my opinion, and then it kind of, I thought Acts 2 and 3 weren't as good, but it was still a fun and enjoyable film. So I put that in the B tier. And yeah, moving on, we'll go to Elvis. This one I just saw a couple days ago, so I'm kind of on the fence. I think the acting in the film is phenomenal. And I think maybe like objectively the film is like, I think technically it's very good. But for my personal enjoyment of it, I originally gave it an A kind of for all that technical achievement. And I think maybe objectively it's an A, but like subjectively from my own personal experience and enjoyment of it, I think I'm leaning more towards the B category. And I'm just trying to filter out like the bias that might have been there, like, oh, this seems like an awards contender, so I should put it up higher. I'm like, just because I think something is an awards contender doesn't mean that I should put it higher in my own list. So I'm going to put that in the B category. Like, I wouldn't highly recommend it, but I thought it was worth the watch, which is what the B category is for. Now, I think it's basically the best one in the B category for what we had this month. And like Jurassic World, I think is pretty close to the bottom. So there's a good enough range in there, but Elvis, I thought, was I go back and forth. I do think it's kind of on another level though, and it's closer to Lightyear than it is the others. I don't know. I get torn between these things. Um, no, okay. There are parts of it that I'm gonna put it in the A tier. So the reason I'm putting it in the A tier is I enjoy the fact that it's a tragedy and it's a tragedy that's done well, and we don't get many of those. So when they come along, I personally actually enjoy those quite a bit more. So that aspect of it being well done is what appeals to me and puts it into the A tier for me. What was a little hard, like placing these, is Black Phone, because this was, I felt like Black Phone was a lot better than Elvis, and I saw those both on the same night. I saw them back to back, and I think I initially put Black Phone in the S tier, but while I really liked it, I don't. It's not one of my favorite films. It is probably one of my most enjoyed horror films, but horror films just don't have anything on some of the other genres of films that I like. So while I really like this, and I think I initially put it in S, I think it's very, very high A tier. And I think it's, whereas like I think Elvis is kind of low A tier, Black Phone is high A tier, and I highly recommend it. I don't know, yeah, it's very close though. But for me, I think I'm going to, in this ranking, err on the side of it has to be clear that it goes into a category that it goes into. Although I was kind of on the fence with Elvis, but I talked myself into it, and that one is a bit more clear now, especially looking at the other movies that are in the B tier. Like for here, there's I think a clear distinction, and these movies all belong in the tiers that they're in. Last up, we have The Phantom of the Open, and this I just got back from seeing, so this is just a couple hours old for me and my experience with it. But this was solidly a B movie. It was a lot of fun. It had some good writing. I think it's on the same level as like Brian and Charles, and it's that sort of a film where if you're just looking for a fun time at the movies, but also get a little bit of heartfelt sort of moments throughout, I think it's a good movie for that. So. Yeah, that is my current ranking. This will probably fluctuate. If I look back at this at the end of the year, some of these might change. That's the other beauty of movies is it's not a set point in time, and it doesn't your perception of or your enjoyment of a film and your evaluation of it can change over time, especially if you see it again or as you're kind of putting in context of other movies, especially when we're doing a tier ranking. But that does it for my list, my tier ranking for the month of June. If you've seen any of these movies or if you've seen ones that I haven't seen, although I think I've seen all the ones that released, I could be wrong, but at least in my area, I think I caught them all. But if you saw any new movies in theaters this month, and or if you've seen any of these, I'd love to hear your rankings down in the comments below. Did you get any S tiers this month, and which of them were your A tiers, especially like which of the films that you really liked this month? I'd love to hear it in the comments below.